chair. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be, let's be honest, as per usual, it's going to be a bit like all over the place. I haven't really planned it out because, I don't know, my mind's been a bit all over the place recently. I didn't really know what I was going to film for today's video, so I was like, this is literally the day, this is Friday, and this needs to go up on Saturday. So I need to film and edit and get it up practically before tomorrow. I have decided for today's video that I'm going to talk about some of the books that I've read that I would like to reread. I have not made a list. I have not made any bullet points for reasons why I want to reread books. I've just got my shelves. Oh yeah, by the way, do you like my new setup? I decided to film over here. One, because I can sit on a chair. I've decided to sit over by my lovely shelf so you can see both of them. And therefore I'm just going to pick off books on my shelf and talk about them and hope that I can remember what they're about. I'm not going to do this in any particular order. I'm literally just going to pull books off my shelf. I'm going to start off with the one book that I'm like literally... I was watching one of Spooby Hall's videos from like a few months back when she was reading this book, and before I read it for the first time I'd watched a lot of vlogs of people reading it because it's supposed to absolutely break you, and most people are like absolutely like waterfalls coming out of their eyes whilst they're reading it. I wasn't. I didn't have that reaction. I feel like for me, things that like usually provoke a sort of crying physical response, for me, just like my response is usually more just like ah. I'm not a horrible human being. I don't lack empathy. I definitely have empathy, but for some reason sad things just don't usually make me cry. I'm just gonna say what the book is. So the first book that I've decided that I would like to reread is A Little Life, and most people are gonna be A Little Life by Hana Yanagihara, in case you didn't know who this was written by. Anyone that's been on BookTube or has watched BookTube for a while, unless you're really far into the sort of fantasy sci-fi side of BookTube, then you probably would have heard of this book. It's just really well known for like absolutely breaking your heart, and it definitely is heartbreaking, and the things I can remember, a lot of the stuff that happened in this, that, you know, is the really heart-wrenching moments, but just at the time it did not provoke a crying response. I feel like I have this like weird response of I feel like I need to cry but I don't. If you have heard about this book, then you would probably be wondering why I would want to put myself through the torment that this book provokes again. And that is because there's just something about reading sad books, or like books that are like particularly like... I didn't find this book super traumatic. I don't get personally super affected by books like this. So therefore it's not a trauma that I'm inflicting upon myself like it is for some other people, or that this book is inflicting upon them. However, it is super sad, and I can obviously see why it's traumatic, both what's happening to the characters but also like how it could be traumatic for someone that's reading it. I'm very lucky that I've sort of lived a very sheltered life, so things like this do not affect me in the same way that they might affect someone else who could potentially sort of see themselves in the character's shoes. So therefore it's not as difficult for me to read this. I just would like to read it again to see if I have the same reaction as I had the first time, or if it's harder for me because I would have already known the characters sort of going into it, or if it's easier for me because I know what's coming. I want to know if it's like the shock factor that makes this book as heart-wrenching as it is, or if it is more connection to the characters that makes it heart-wrenching. And I mean, I really enjoyed the characters in here. I think that's something that a lot of literary fiction, when it's written well, the characters are like usually a very are usually the focal point of the story, and it's what I find also with The Secret History, which I'm reading at the moment. So definitely want to get to this like sometime in the near future. I can't remember if I gave it 4 or 5 stars. I have a feeling that I only gave it 4 stars, but it could also have been 5 stars. I don't know, but I read it like in 2 or 3 days, which I was shocked at the fact that I could do that because it's about 700 pages. So it just says it's really easy, writing-wise, to read, especially in comparison to her other book that I've read, The People in the Trees, I think it's called. This was just, writing-wise, a lot easier to read, but obviously it has a lot of like traumatic themes and like really sad stuff. I'm not going to explain much because everyone should know what this is, whether you know because of the book or because of the film. It by Stephen King. This is one of my favourite Stephen King books, primarily because it's the first one that I read, but also because I really love the characters. I really love the friendship group, the kids that are the main characters in this story. It is massive. Sometimes just the fact that I've read this, and also there's another one that I think I'm going to mention. The fact that I've read this copy is like 1,140 pages or something like that. The fact that I've read this twice, 2 times, really just makes me super proud of myself, because I like, honestly, I've come so far. The fact that I've read this twice, and the thing is, the first time I read this was when I was like, I must have been like 15 or 16, I'm not quite sure. I feel like it was after my birthday, so I think I was 16 when I first read this. And I'm just like, well done, Chloe, for doing that, and for doing it twice. It did take me like a month or 2 both times, but I want to get to this again, hopefully this year in like September or October, because so far the last 2 times I've read it have been with 2-year intervals. So I read it in 2017, and then I read it in 2019, and now it's 2021, so I want to get to this again. I'm not going to say anything else about that. I feel like it's going to be a tradition for me. Hopefully every time I read it I can cut down the time that it takes. I'm going to shorten this down because I don't want to like sit and just talk about Stephen King all the time. There's one book that I've mentioned before that I wanted to reread, which is The Shining by Stephen King. Mainly because the first time I read it I don't think I appreciated it the same way. It was one of the first books that I read from him. I think it was like the 4th book maybe. And I don't think I quite appreciated it at the time, and since hearing people raving about it and how much they love it and how it's like their favourite Stephen King book, I just really want to get to it again. So I'm hoping to read this soon. Definitely want to get to this at some point. And then finally for the Stephen King books, I mean, like, I pretty much reread a lot of his books, most of his books that I've read so far. The one that I'm particularly interested in rereading, which is yet again another massive book, like this is even bigger than it. This is like 1,300 pages or 1,400. It's The Stand, which is post-apocalyptic. Basically is about this like plague or like this virus, which, you know, but it's like, yeah, it's post-apocalyptic. It's just following like a whole bunch of characters, the usual Stephen King spiel of like loads of different characters who eventually sort of come together at some point. It's like marketed as like being like an epic. It has got like that sort of feel of like an epic sci-fi, epic fantasy without being like super out there, because it's got the grittiness and the realness of a lot of Stephen King's works. Is one of the things that I particularly love. Like, for example, It is a great example of this. That and I think this one as well, from what I can remember, Stephen King is so good at taking sort of really sort of imaginative horror, things that come from our imagination, things that don't seem particularly real, but that still scare the bejesus out of us, but then also mixing it with real life horrors like bullying and racism and sexism and abuse and just all these things that people actually face in the real world, and mixing it with the things that people usually don't face in the real world. That's what I really enjoy, and I'm pretty sure he does it with this one as well. I'm pretty sure there's some characters in here that are just like not great, basically. But yeah, I know that there's a read along going on for this. I think it's like over a couple of months. I want to say it's like April and May or something like that. So maybe I'll take part in that. But once again, it's massive. So I don't know if I'll get to this soon, but I definitely want to reread it at some point in the future. The next book that I decided to pick up off my shelf was Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is, I've mentioned this before in a thriller recommendations video. It's like YA thriller slash slightly like survival horror-ish. I really enjoyed the characters in this. I really enjoyed some of the representation that was in it from what I can remember. It had, for me, a nice level of like body horror. It could have been a lot worse, but I don't have, like, I have a very high threshold for what I can tolerate when it comes to like gore and body horror. So this was really not that disgusting for me personally. Also because it's YA. I feel like with YA you can't go too far. But I really enjoyed this. This is about a boarding school that's sort of been quarantined, and that is because there's this plague that seems to have like taken over the boarding school. So essentially it deals with this illness called the tox, which seems to have taken over this boarding school, which I think is on like a remote island or something from what I can remember. And this boarding school has been quarantined so that this tox can't get anywhere else, but it also means that the girls can't leave the school. It's an all-girls boarding school. And at this point, while we're reading it, it's been 18 months. Most of the teachers are dead. From what I can remember, there's only a couple that are still alive. And the thing with this illness or this disease, this virus, is that once it sort of takes over the girls, it causes them to have these weird flare-ups where weird things happen to their bodies, and it sort of shows up in different ways amongst different people, but it's also only after they've sort of hit puberty that it seems to take effect on these girls. And obviously every time they have these flare-ups it's painful and just horrible, but it doesn't kill them straight away, which is a really interesting aspect, that people don't just like die from it, that it's like this horror that's constantly inflicted upon them. I don't have much else to say except from the fact that this was like super quick. Again, I didn't read this that long ago, so I probably won't read this for a little while, but I did really enjoy it, and I think I gave it, again, 4 stars or something. One book that I definitely know I want to get to at some point, so that I can come to understand it a bit more, is The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I read this a year and a half ago, I think, maybe coming up on 2 years, and the first time around I really enjoyed it. I really liked the concept, I really liked the ending. I just want to go back, because this is kind of a mystery. I like the idea of knowing the ending and then going back and trying to sort of piece everything together to make it sort of all, to see how it's gotten to the ending. Because sometimes I find that when I'm reading a mystery, when I eventually get to the end and I find out what's going on, I can't quite remember everything that's happened before. Whereas it's nice to know the ending and then to go back to the beginning and see how it's getting there. There's not much else to say. I know that some people didn't really enjoy this, some people were confused by it. It's about this man who is in a mansion house with a bunch of different people, really sort of like a mixture of people, because there's obviously like the butlers, but there's also like the owners and all that stuff, all the really rich, high up people. And essentially every night the same thing happens. So what will happen is things happen, and then at the end of the night the same thing happens every night, is that this woman called Evelyn Hardcastle is murdered, and the main character is trying to find out who is murdering her. And what happens is she gets murdered at the end of the night, and if he hasn't figured out who's killed her, then he wakes up the next day in a new body, and he keeps on changing bodies in different people. And on the one hand you've got the mystery of trying to figure out who murdered Evelyn Hardcastle, and then on the other hand you've got the mystery of trying to figure out why he keeps on waking up in different people's bodies, like what is it that's going on, because obviously it's not normal. So it was just a really interesting concept. I really liked the way this was taken. It had slightly a slight sci-fi feeling towards the very end, finding out like what's going on with this. So I really enjoyed it, and I definitely want to reread it. I want to say soon, maybe towards like October time, because it does have that kind of spooky feeling. The next book that I've literally just thought of that's not on my shelves, but I remember reading because I borrowed it from the library and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars and I just really enjoyed it, and despite the fact that this next book is, what is it? Despite the fact that it's like historical fiction, I just really enjoyed this story, and I really enjoyed the film that came out afterwards, and that is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. I just really enjoyed this book. I think I first heard Kat talk about it, Paperback Dreams. It was just really a really interesting story. Certain parts of it, a bit like A Little Life, were a bit sort of heartbreaking and sad. Again, it's sort of about a very dysfunctional person, a dysfunctional life, a dysfunctional family. Just things do not go right for this main character, and it just makes for a really interesting read. So I can't remember his name, but we're following this main character who essentially, his dad is a very tortured, very messed up person who fought in the war. Essentially, he's been in the war. It could have been against Korea, I can't remember, some sort of war he was in. He comes back and is very, as you can imagine, suffers from a lot of PTSD. He's just a very tortured individual. He meets this woman at a diner and ends up marrying her, and she gets pregnant with the person that then becomes our main character. And it's just following both his life sort of growing up, but also what he's like when he's older. He gets into different situations, things happen, people sort of like leave him or die, and he's just, through a lot of it, feels very alone, and he just, like, it's just bad things keep happening, but in like an older setting than A Little Life, which I think A Little Life was like, it has a setting of being like the 90s, I want to say. Obviously it depends because it spans a lot of time. It's similar in that way that it spans like different decades, because we're watching him sort of grow up, and it's just one of those interesting studies of sort of when bad things happen to people growing up, where it can lead them. It was a really interesting story. I really want to reread it. I just thought it was so well written, and I definitely want to read more by this author because I know that he's got some other books out that I'd be really interested in reading. I don't think any of them are going to quite hit the mark like The Devil All the Time did. The film, as I said before, was also really, really good. It just had loads of really famous people in it as well, which I tend to find that films that have loads of famous actors in don't tend to be that great. Like, it tends to be, despite the fact that there's all these really great actors and famous people, it feels like almost you just cast them for the sake of it. Whereas this one, it felt like they all sort of belonged in this film, that they all had the right roles, and they were all, it was just a great film. Just a quick mention, these are books that I have spoken about on my channel before. One of them was in my January wrap-up, the other was in my February wrap-up, and that is The Troop by Nick Cutter and Brother by Niall Allborn. These are both like horror novels. I really enjoyed them. This, once again, deals with the sort of like illness thing, but we don't focus so much on the illness, or it's not really an illness actually. It's essentially this group of kids, like Boy Scouts that are on an island, and then suddenly this strange man shows up and there's something wrong with him. And then it's just, it sort of shows how the events unfold. It's really creepy, it was really well written, and if you like body horror and stuff like that, if you enjoyed Wilder Girls, then this is definitely something you should pick up. The other one, Brother by Niall Allborn. This is about a family of serial killers in the heart of Appalachia in the US, and they just, you know, kill people, and the main character, who is one of the sons, he's actually the youngest son in this family, he starts questioning it, not sort of outwardly, sort of more in his head because we're following his perspective. He's sort of questioning why things like this are happening. It sort of worries him because he, outside of the family, starts to experience things which could potentially be complicated by his family situation. So he's just really like, he doesn't understand it, and it just leads to a thing that happens, and that's that's the book. Another one that I really want to reread is this short story collection by Carmen Maria Machado. It's Her Body and Other Parties. I read this last year in December, so once again I probably won't reread this for a while. Maybe I'll pick up one or two like short stories here and there. It's really well written, and since you can see this in a vlog if you want. In my first Tis the Damn Readathon vlog I read this, also with the same author. These together just look so great, I love it. But I really enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed the writing style, which just made me want to pick this up again and reread it. So it was really good. As I said, short story collection. All of the short stories are sort of like horror, fantasy, fabulism. I mean, there's like, here it just says magical realism, science fiction, comedy, horror, fantasy, fabulism. There's just like so much stuff going on in here, like all genre bending stories. And they mainly focus on like bodies, and a lot of it's to do with women's bodies. There's stories about sort of ownership of your body and things like that, and I found it really interesting. We'll turn back to another trusty Stephen King. I said I was only going to do 3, but now we've got a 4th one. Misery by Stephen King. I think most people know what Misery is about. It's about this crazy woman who kidnaps her favourite author, who has written this series that she really likes about a character called Misery Chastain. And at the beginning of this, I mean, even in the blurb, oh fudge, even in the blurb we find out that this character has just been killed off by the author, and Misery Chastain has just been killed off by the author, and our main character, Annie Wilkes, is devastated and infuriated about it, so therefore she kidnaps the writer and essentially torments him, tortures him until he writes a sequel in which this character comes back to life or has never been dead, but it has to be perfect for Annie. She doesn't want it to just be some sort of like half-assed writing, she wants it to be perfect. So she keeps him there until he does that, and that's basically the story. We're following this. I think we're from Paul Sheldon's point of view, finding out what it's like for him to sort of be in this situation where he's being held hostage, all the pain that he goes through, all the mental torture that he's going through. So that was that. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a bit all over the place. I know I didn't really like have any coherent thoughts. I apologise. That's just been my life kind of at the moment. I am hoping that somehow these videos are going to start to get more like well prepared as time goes on. I think it's something I'm going to get better at, hopefully. I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, then make sure to click subscribe, to click the like button. That really helps me a lot. Share this with your friends if you want to. You can also follow me on Instagram. As always, it's linked down in the description, and I will see you in my next video.